Leaders from across the state of Washington are signing on to a pledge to institute real solutions to deal with the homelessness crisis, which of course we know is caused by substance abuse and mental illness. This segment is brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. And Future 42 is behind the pledge that we're talking about. So they put together, and that's why I love Future 42. It's not about political party, and I love our partnership. It's not about political party, Democrat versus Republican. You know how I feel about the two parties. It's about good policy. Who has good policy? I don't care if it comes from a Democrat or it comes from a Republican, but anyone who's willing to actually acknowledge the root cause of one of the biggest crises we face and pledge to push for real solutions is welcome in this conversation. So I'll give you a little bit about the pledge, but then I'm going to let Nate Nehring, who's the Future 42 Snohomish County director, talk us through it a little bit more. But a couple of the things that it does, and again, it's just a promise from elected leaders. It says requiring individuals who receive taxpayer-subsidized supportive housing while experiencing substance use disorders actively participate in drug treatment programs with the goal of sobriety. Imagine that. That seems like a pretty reasonable thing to say, yeah, I support. If you're going to put someone in taxpayer-funded tiny house or whatever it is, and they've got a substance abuse issue, it's contingent on them going to treatment so that they actually better their circumstances, defunding existing harm reduction programs, investing in the creation of additional mental health treatment beds, et cetera, et cetera. So again, Nate Nehring, who heads the Snohomish County efforts for Future 42, joined us to talk about this pledge and why he thinks it goes beyond just an empty signature to follow a promise that you might make. Nate Nehring, welcome to Undivided.
Hey, Brandi, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
It's been a while. I'm sorry for that. You know, you're just so
Oh,
busy. You're changing the
yeah, we
world.
both are, but it's always fun to be on. I appreciate you bringing me on. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so you're here in your capacity with Future 42. Specifically, what are you doing with our friends at F42?
Yeah, so I'm directing the Snohomish project for Future 42. So I'm working on Snohomish County related items and also helping out with some statewide messaging, which we'll talk a little bit more about.
Yeah, so let's talk about homelessness. We have last week on the show talked quite a bit about something that was said down in King County, the King County executive saying that homelessness is not driven by drug abuse or mental illness, that it is a failure of the housing market. What do you think is driving our homeless crisis?
Yeah, I saw the statement from the King County executive and was really surprised to hear somebody actually say that. I mean, I think it's pure fiction. The idea that mental illness and drug addiction don't have a role to play. Anybody who's gone out onto the streets and talked with individuals who are struggling with addiction can understand very clearly that drug addiction and mental illness are a primary cause for homelessness. And obviously, there are cases where you have other causes, but I think the vast majority of cases you've got some sort of interplay between mental illness and addiction. And so the question then is, how do we address this, right? We have the housing first model, which is typically proposed in progressive areas of, let's just get people who are homeless off the street and into shelter. And I don't think that's working. I think we see in Seattle and throughout the Puget Sound region, and frankly, throughout the country, that this is failing in addressing the core needs, which again are treatment and the need to overcome an addiction.
Yeah, one of the last times we had you on, something that you were pushing for is, okay, if we're going to put people into, and correct me if I'm mischaracterizing it because it's been a while, but, yes, we want people off the streets, right? We want people, we'd rather have them living in some kind of shelter than in a tent or in a park or whatever it is. But there have to be some sort of stipulations for that. We have to make sure that they're actively participating in drug treatment, for instance. Have you seen any traction toward a desire to do that?
Well, it's interesting. I actually do think that there's been a bit of a momentum shift, and maybe not as much in King County, given the statements which we recently heard, but in Snohomish County and in other places throughout the state, I think we have seen a bit of a mindset shift in that direction of people starting to realize, hey, maybe housing first might work for folks who are, victims of domestic violence or are down on their luck due to financial insecurity. But when somebody has a severe fentanyl addiction, maybe it's not a great idea to give them a pair of keys to a hotel room or to their own unit where they're going to go in and continue to use and potentially overdose or contaminate the taxpayer-funded unit or whatnot. And so people are starting to realize that, whether it's elected officials. I've talked to several prominent nonprofits throughout the region who are all saying, look, housing first is not working when we're looking at this fentanyl issue. We need to try something else.
Yeah, or at least not housing first and then no strings attached, like you
Right.
said. I mean, that just
Right.
doesn't it defies common sense. It really does. And so it's hard to see some people continue to push that narrative. So tell me about the pledge that you are asking or encouraging other elected leaders to sign.
So at Future 42, one of the things we've been working on are what are some alternatives we can put forward? Because it's, it's one thing to say, well, we reject housing first and we reject harm reduction and the failed policies that progressives typically put forward. But I think the next question is, well, what do you want to do instead? What is the solution then? And so what we've worked on through this Real Solutions to Homelessness Pledge are 7 tangible items that local elected officials throughout the state can sign on to and can commit to that will move things forward in a positive direction. And so these are things from, making sure we're treatment first, accountability through things like mandatory minimum sentencing, taking a look at involuntary commitment through Ricky's Law, which was made available through the state legislature on a bipartisan basis. And so there are lots of policies that can be done at the local level, and there are things we can do as an alternative to housing first and harm reduction.
Yeah. So sometimes, pledges are just like, it's like, oh, you're going to sign this and then nothing really happens. So I guess what's the intent there? Just to show that there is support for a more common sense approach, or what realistically is it going to accomplish?
Yeah, I think the intent is twofold. First of all, it's to show that there are quite a few elected officials throughout the state who are interested in alternative solutions. We had early on over 50 local elected officials sign on to this pledge, which is significant for a pledge like this. And that number is continuing to grow. But I think the next step, and maybe the more tangible step, is those elected officials who say, yes, we agree with these sorts of policies. Yes, we do want to shift from housing first and harm reduction. They now have examples of policies they can implement and jurisdictions which have successfully implemented them, and language for ordinances and whatnot that they can take to their jurisdiction and introduce at a city council or a county council meeting for consideration, so that the policy can be adopted in their local jurisdiction.
Yeah, I love that. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Like, no real leader should need credit for anything. It's like somebody already did it. It's working. Let's do it here. Take the ideas and let's do what works. So I really love that.
Yeah. I'm all for stealing good ideas. We just don't want to take any bad ideas, right?
True. Yes. Leave the bad ideas. And on that end, I want to end here because I guess I'm personally baffled why we're still in this place. Like, we were talking on the show, we read part of a lawsuit that King County filed against Big Pharma back in 2018. And there were a lot of jurisdictions that sued Big Pharma for the opioid crisis. The city of Everett, for instance, the state at large, the city of Seattle. And they said in no uncertain terms in those lawsuits, our homeless crisis is being driven by drug abuse. So that was just 6 years ago. And now here we are with the most populated county in the state, the executive saying this is a result of housing failure. And so it's just such whiplash for me. But why do you think, given what to be true, what I know to be true, what people on the street say to be true, why do you think we still have leaders who are so stuck on this housing first model?
No, I think it's a great question, and it's very disappointing to see. I don't think we're ever going to make progress and find solutions on this issue if we're not going to acknowledge the significant role that drug addiction and mental illness plays as root causes of homelessness. As for the reasoning, why do elected officials do this? I mean, one thought is, it's really easy if you say, well, the homelessness crisis is just a result of not having enough housing or shelter capacity. Well, then we can raise taxes and just put more money toward housing and wipe our hands clean and call it good. We've done what we need to. In reality, tackling drug addiction and tackling mental illness are much more complicated issues. They're very difficult. It's not a matter of let's just throw funding this way and we don't have to worry about it anymore. I mean, these are going to take years and decades to solve, and it's hard work. And frankly, I think it's the job of elected officials, if they're truly wanting to serve their constituents, to roll up their sleeves and get to work on it rather than ignoring the problem or pretending like it doesn't exist, which unfortunately we're starting to see more of, as you pointed out.
Yeah. So if there are any elected leaders watching who would like to sign on to that pledge, how can they do it?
They can go to future42.org. And the pledge is on there, so you can fill it out online, or you can always reach out to me by email as well. That's Nate@p42.com.
All right, Nate, we appreciate it. Thank you for being a card-carrying member of Team Sanity.
Thanks, Brandi. Take care.
Yeah, it's good to know that there are some leaders who recognize that what we've been doing isn't working and that you do have to focus on the drug issue and the mental health issue, especially after last week when we had Dow Constantine be like, it's a housing issue, which is just absurd. It's just absurd. I don't understand it. I don't know if that's because that's where they can get the most buy-in to raising taxes to build more affordable housing, if it's about money. I don't know what it's about. I do know that it's not going to work. And so I think it's a start to get almost a running list of elected leaders who are willing to go in a different direction and then gain some momentum that way. That segment was brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org.